Dear Church, let's talk about the church and technology with Brandon Edwards. Hello and welcome to the Dear Church podcast. I'm your host, Chris McCurley. I'm joined by my good friend, Brandon Edwards, all the way from Columbus, Ohio. Brandon, thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Absolutely.
You know, you've been on here before, so you're kind of used to this routine. And actually, what you've come on before to talk about, we're going to talk a little bit about today as well. But it's been, 2 or 3 years probably, maybe even more since you've been on. And it's a topic that I think is worthwhile. And so before we jump in, though, talk about the work there in Ohio and talk about your family and all the good things that you're doing right now.
Sure. So, yeah, I'm the campus minister at The Ohio State University. So I have to say that or I get fired. So it's one of those things. But I've been here just almost 3 years now, and it's been an absolute blessing to work with students there. 65,000 students on campus. It's one of the largest universities in the United States, and so possibly even the world. And so it makes it quite fun. The congregation I work with is the Church of Christ on Fishinger Road. We're about a mile off campus. And in fact, we've been kind of the campus church for since really the 1870s. We've been around for a long time, and we've had the campus ministry on campus as a student organization since 1967. And so we've been doing campus ministry for a long time. I'm in a succession of some great people who've come before me who have built the foundation, and the elders and the ministers here. And so it's been fantastic. It really has. It's a fun work. It's a very challenging work. It feels very front lines because of the fact that you're talking about a very secular campus, very, very different from your private Christian university or the like. But we have so many fantastic students, so many incredible conversations. And so the work is going great. Just from a standpoint of trying to be faithful, not always looking for what we would consider success, but instead looking to be faithful in our context and where we are in the moment. But so much of what I do, along with my family, my wife, and my 3 kids here, so much of what we do is tied into modern culture, into where we are. I mean, I work with the generation, basically a constantly evolving door of new generations that come through the door in college ministry, and technology is such a huge part of that. In fact, it is I would say almost, it feels like 80% of the work is connecting first time through digital media or through an online world to then carry over into personal one-on-one relationships and discussions and so forth. So that's a little bit about just the background and the rest and what's going on here and so forth.
Well, and you're the man for that job, because not only do you work well with college students and all folks in the church, but also with those outside the church and that you're trying to reach. I know you are very evangelistic minded, but also you, I wouldn't even say you dabble in, you have made a part of your career doing social media, website work for the church, and you've done a lot when it comes to videos and things of that nature to try to put a different spin on things, to get the message out there, and to put a good face on the church, a more modern face, if you will. So talk a little bit about that, because I'm one that's right in line with that. I feel like that, I say all the time, this is one place where I believe in evolution, which is in the church. The church has to evolve. It has to adapt. It has to adjust. I think we bemoan the fact oftentimes that we're losing numbers and, we're losing our young people or whatever it is, but we're very resistant to change anything. It's kind of the whole definition of insanity. We want to do the same thing and expect different results, and it just doesn't happen. And I think one of the things that we can do differently is be where Jesus would be, which is the marketplace. And the marketplace now, where the most people are gathered, is the online community. And so talk a little bit about some of the ways that we as the church can reach, the online community, where we can reach others using like social media platforms, website, and all that.
Yeah. So one of the key components is when I speak to churches about this in general, is I always tell them, I know this is hard. And the reason it's hard is because it's the largest shift in communication in 500 years. It's the largest shift in communication since the printing press. Since that changed how we, did church. Prior to that, most people didn't read, for one, so you would have to go to a local church where the Bible was chained to the front and somebody would read it to you, in essence. Suddenly, the printing press changed all of that and made it accessible, and people could have access to it. Now, with the advent of not just the internet, but especially the advent of social media and the rest, that all of it has absolutely altered what we are able to do prior to this. Now, that is hard because that is a massive cultural shift. And so I always try to lean in and tell people, look, I am well aware that I cannot tell you how many preachers I hear all the time. It's like, I don't know how to do that. I know. It's okay. This isn't like picking up a book and just reading it and going, got it. There is an actual aspect of having to learn these items. And anytime we have to learn and change the way we communicate, it's hard. And so that's the key thing that I always tell people from the starting point. From there, I also remind them it's a necessity, all things to all men, that we are called to go into all the world. And the reality is from my desk, from where I'm at right now, every week, I go into all the world in a way that Paul would have jumped on in a heartbeat. Paul would have been on Twitter, and he would have been on Facebook. He would have been he would have hated the original limits on Twitter. He would have really not liked those at all. He would have been like 280 characters. That's crazy. Now you could do whatever you want, long form, but he would have hated that, but he would have been on there. And so often we just think, well, that's not my thing. And I always love when people say that, that's not my thing. And I say, what if it's the thing for someone else that could lead them to Jesus? What if it's that thing that will allow them to at least connect? Because our ultimate goal is not just impressions or views or so forth. Our ultimate goal is people loving and knowing God, submitting to his will. And you can't do that if they don't know you. And if you can put, as you say, oh, look, this face does not get any better. This is not a good face, but it's a face. And hopefully the messaging of what we're setting forth and what we're putting out to people, people can see and hear Jesus. I can't tell you how often, and you may have the same thing. I'll get messages from people that say, I didn't know you guys existed until right now. And the natural inclination is for us to go, how could you not? We've been here since 1870. And then I want to go, or maybe we just haven't done a good enough job letting people know we exist. In fact, when I first came here, the campus ministry, year one, literally was our whole entire mantra was, we exist. That was our marketing ploy. That was everything is, we are a club. We are a club on campus. We exist. We want the students to know we're here. We're not going to sit on our laurels or our little bit of an ego that we might have on the situation where we go, no, they should know. They should know. Well, everybody should just understand. Instead, we're going to be the communicators. We're going to be the ones who are bringing the message to people. We're not just going to sit and wait for them to show up. The irony, and I'll give a living example of this, the irony for me was I had a bunch of students that grew up at our church who go to other universities besides Ohio State. And so I was starting a series on, it was on Mere Christianity. And they said, we really want to be part of that. And I went, all right, well, I'll make recordings of the same lessons and I'll put them online so you can watch them after the fact. The first week I had 5 people. Well, by week 25, we were averaging 4,000. And wow. I don't have 4,000 students. And I couldn't figure out where they were all coming from. And then I just realized people were looking for something. They were looking for a connection some way. And dozens of messages, hundreds of messages even that came simply because we made the messaging available in a format that allowed for people who were searching to find. And it was such a huge, big thing for us.
And I like what you just said there, because I think, not trying to point the finger, not trying to be condemning, I just think that a lot of this boils down to, most of our leaders in our churches are of an older generation that, didn't deal with this. And I think it's easy, if we're not careful, to kind of say, well, what we've done in the past is good enough, and we're just going to keep doing that. We're going to keep banging that drum, when you've got to be in touch with an ever-evolving society and understanding that social media, whether you like it or not, the internet, whether you like it or not, it is very influential. So why not be a part of it rather than just distancing ourselves from it, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. In fact, one of the key components I always share in this is we have bought into an idea that we have to be successful in all the things that we do as a church. That success is often even viewed by metrics, by baptisms, or whatever it may be. Now, I always tell people, I rejoice every time someone dies to themselves in the waters of baptism. Like, it's just an unbelievable thing. But the church's role is not to save people. Now, in the context of, I don't save anybody. God does the saving. God changes hearts and the rest. We absolutely teach the fullness of Scripture, which leads to repentance through the death and burial and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and repentance through the act of baptism. But My role is faithfulness. My role is to faithfully proclaim the gospel to all people. And if that's your messaging, then suddenly I just look at the world a bit different. I'm not looking at whether or not everything's always going to go well. Instead, I'm always looking at, okay, what can I try that might be different in this moment that is still biblical, still Christian. I always said, look, there's still parameters of which I live by,
Sure.
but that would allow me to share the gospel to people. And I'm not worried about whether or not it's always going to work. In fact, we had a series that we did earlier this year that I turned around after about 6 weeks and I went, this is not doing what we hoped it would do. And so we changed it. We made a change. And a lot of people would go, oh man, it was kind of failed. And I went, no, we just learned right now that doesn't work in this situation. So let's try something different. And being allowed to fail is a huge component when it comes to evangelism. Being allowed to try new things to see what new generations, what relates to new generations is just massive. And I'll give you a living way this is working right now. I've never in my life over the past almost 25 years of ministry seen more young men be interested in the gospel. Normally, I would have 65 to 70% girls, whether it's in a youth group or even in a ministry and the rest. Right now, I'm probably 80 to 85% male. It's a massive anomaly. And you look at it even politically, that's the way it's gone. This last election, young men are trending conservative. I have so many young men that are very big on just wanting to get married, have a career and a family. They're not looking for all of the bells and whistles and all the craziness that everybody assumes of this generation. They're just wanting, in fact, the key word we use is simplicity in a chaotic world. And so when I kind of saw that about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, that's the messaging I changed to. And we've had predominantly males. The opposite is true on the other side. The more progressive, I use that word loosely, more politically than anything, progressive, liberal, and the rest, that's where I find most of the young ladies right now. And so there's this weird anomaly that's happening between the two, and there's a little bit of a disconnect. Well, knowing that, how do we best interact now with young men and young women in the messaging that we put out through social media and so forth? If you're condescending and if you're uptight against all feminist concepts, girls are going to tune you out almost instantaneously. If you're instead anti-male and very against all types of any type of masculinity at all, the guys are going to tune you out. And so you have to understand who you're talking to in the moments. And that's a shift that many people in the church world are not acknowledging. They're not seeing it yet. In fact, I think it's and I'm not to get into politics, but I think it's one of the reasons why this election went the way it did this past time is they missed the cultural shifts.
No, I totally agree with that. And I think we miss them in the church. And I think that, when we do use technology, a lot of it is good, but some of it we could, certainly look at and say we need to approach it differently. And one of the things that you touched on, I see quite often, is Christians posting gotcha memes, these memes that are political in nature, that are meant to gig or poke or even ridicule and mock. And it's like, maybe you can stick your chest out and say, look, I'm standing for quote unquote truth. But at the same time, do you really think that's going to be attractive for someone outside the church? And I guess people kind of might respond to that saying, well, they're not going to, they're not interested anyway. Well, you don't know that. And I think about Ezekiel and how his job was Ezekiel 3, where, his job was just to be the sounding alarm. His job was to be the one who warned. It wasn't his job to convince. It wasn't his job to save them, like you said. It was his job to warn. And I'm afraid that even on social media, we're trying to win an argument rather than win a soul. And I think that's where we get ourselves into a lot of problems because we're not remembering the bigger goal. And the bigger goal is, do you want this person to come to Christ? As we begin 2025, there's no better way to invest in yourself and your future. Education is one of the most transformative investments that you can make, but not all programs are created equal. Freed-Hardeman University, however, is redefining online graduate education by combining convenience with real-world depth and hands-on learning experiences. Imagine starting the year with an MBA program that takes you beyond the textbooks, like exploring global businesses on a trip to Seoul, South Korea, or diving deep into history as a theology student on a guided archaeological dig in the Bible lands. And for graduate counseling students, immersive weekend classes provide that essential in-person connection. This is just a glimpse of how Freed-Hardeman University equips students for both career success and a purpose-driven life. With over 20 graduate programs and certificates to choose from, now is the perfect time to take the leap. Plus, all application fees and testing requirements have been waived for this academic year. That means fewer barriers and more opportunities to get started. To learn more, visit www.fhu.edu/Dear Church. That's www.fhu.edu/Dear Church. Start the year strong by investing in yourself with the graduate program from Freed-Hardeman University. And now back to the show. Do you want this person to come to Christ?
Yes, no, I think you're spot on. In fact, on that, one of the key components is we forget who our audience is. So, for example, on my Facebook, I'm very particular about my Facebook and what I call my voice. I have a very particular voice when it comes to Facebook and the way that I speak, the way that I write, because more than half of my audience friends, social media friends on Facebook, are atheists, agnostics. They're students that I've run into during my time in grad school. They're things like that. And so I try to be not necessarily positive, but I always tell people I want people to think. That's my goal. Yeah. So if I can get people to think, then I've done a good job. If I can get them to even question the concept of, well, what does he mean by that? Then I've done something right. The problem that we run across at times, and by the way, I don't always get that right. That's my goal, at least. The problem with that ultimately is that we often post things to the wrong audience. What I see a lot of preachers do, and they're well-intentioned. I always tell this, they're well-intentioned, well-meaning, but they're so used to preaching from a pulpit that they think that when they preach from a pulpit is the same as preaching on social media. Yeah. It's a completely different audience. You're not preaching to the saved. Your goal on social media should be to preach to the lost. And so, it's one thing when I get up and preach to the congregation. It's another when I'm speaking to people who I know are outside of the church. And it's so easy to forget that because most of our friends are the people who go to church with us. Well, I don't view social media like that. I view social media as an opportunity to outreach to people I don't know and I don't have automatic connections with. Now, that's a different strategy. But even a website, your website should not be for your church. Your website should be for those who might come and look to see and find out about your church. But we've made our websites internal. We've made our social media internal. We've made everything messaging-wise towards the us. And then we wonder why nobody knows we exist or nobody cares about the things we're posting. And it's because they're all internal as opposed to actually being external to those who are seeking in those moments. And it's amazing what happens when you shift that voice, when you shift the voice to, who am I talking to? Well, I'm talking to the lost. So how would I say this to someone if I was sitting across from them, having coffee for the first time? What would I make them want to think? Would I post abortion is murder? Or would I ask, tell me what you think about life? Like, tell me about how do you view humanity? I honestly, I do this all the time. I might even throw out a culturally relevant situation that just happened and go, do you think life matters? Like just in general? And they might go, so what do you think about, the assassination of this person and so forth? What's your thoughts about that? And from there, I can gauge their response and then best know how to hopefully allow them to get them to think about something beyond just a bumper sticker theology that so many end up with, abortion is murder and so forth, to see beyond just those moments, especially on social media.
Yeah, I mean, terrific point, because we do this in our pulpits, we do this on social media. It's like a guy said one time, critics write for other critics. They want the praise. You see this with the Oscars or any of those awards shows. It's just, it's actors, wanting the accolades from other actors, right? I mean, that's all it's about. They want the applause. And I'm not saying that that's everyone's motive on social media who's a preacher or a Christian. I'm just saying that I think unknowingly a lot of times we post in order to get the applause or the pats on the backs or thank you for standing for truth and those kind of things, when in actuality, it's not about banging the drum. It's about trying to reach those who don't even know you have a drum, right? It's about trying to reach those who don't know anything about these topics that you're talking about. I mean, I've said it before from the pulpit. Folks in our general community don't care what our stance is on a cappella singing. I mean, they don't care.
Correct.
And they probably don't care what our stance is on most of the things, but they will notice if we care about them, if we are interested in reaching them or loving them, if we're trying to be like Jesus. And I think I see this all the time where somebody posts something and it's very critical, and somebody else will post and they'll go back and forth. And I think, what's a non-Christian perceiving this to be? I can't imagine that they're looking at this and saying, well, that's attractive. I want to go be a part of that group.
Correct.
Here they are arguing and fighting with each other, fighting with people in the world. And I'm like, yeah, that doesn't give off a good vibe. Talk a little bit about the website, because you said something there that is a paradigm shift in the way that we need to think about church websites. And I think there are many churches that say, well, we have a website, and I think there are a lot of churches that don't have the resources to put one together that is clean and crisp and good and all that kind of stuff. They just don't have those resources. And so it's not their fault. But talk about how we can make those impressions better.
Sure. So when it comes to websites in general, and obviously I design websites, I have some great people who I know who design websites for churches specifically, who walk them through these very things. Ichthus Digital is one of those. They do a fantastic job. When it comes to websites, your website should be for outsiders, not for insiders. There's a natural aspect where you post things that matter to your church. In fact, you want to look like a church that's alive. I always have to tell people, if they go to your church, it's like a welcome mat. If they go to your website and they find out that you're in, it says, we can't wait for our upcoming picnic, fall of 97, they're going to go, they're dead. Like, there's nothing there. Why would I go and attend this church? By the way, that's a real example that happened. The first time I visited a church, I was traveling, and I literally said, we can't wait for our wedding. It was on the front of the whole entire website. I went, 97? Boy, they were on the cusp of something in 97. But they're so far behind now that they were completely lost. That in and of itself, the website is meant to be for people on the outside to find out, because they're not going to place a phone call. They're not looking you up in the yellow pages. They're Googling you. They're looking you up on the search engine. And that's the other key thing. If your website, if somebody Googles Church of Christ, Columbus, Ohio, and you don't come up in the first 3 or 4 metrics there on the first 3, they're never going to find you. They're not. It's the only way that we do see this is there are older generations that still call or ask someone, do you know of a church somewhere in this area? That still happens. So it's not 100% everybody always does this, but every single college student I've worked with and every single person, I would say under the age of 50, Googles everything now. And if you don't have a website that points them to your times of worship, where you meet, if they can look through the different aspects of what you have going from a ministry perspective, what things they can expect, then they're not going to come. Because I can guarantee you one thing, there are other churches in your area who are doing it better. And that's just the reality. They're going to do it better. And you wonder why the mega churches always seem to get all the visitors and the rest, is because they care about the first impression. And that first impression through social media or through a website is massive. And we've neglected that. That's why I believe, like groups like Ichthus Digital and other, it's Tim Yeager, so with World Bible School and the rest, they do host just a ton of church websites, do a fantastic job with that. In and of itself, those things matter because it's just your first impression most of all. The second part of it is, it doesn't have, let's say you don't have the money. Let's say you're a small church and so forth, and you don't have the money to do a website, to do those things. Social media is free. Now, when it's free, you are the product. Okay. And when it's free with social media, so if you have a Facebook page, Facebook is going to sell you to everybody else in the world. That's what they're trying to do. That's how they make their money in the end. So if it's a free product, then the way that you use it, you can still build a free concept out there and point people to your Facebook page, whether you live stream or don't. Your blog that your preacher's writing every week in the bulletin. There's so many things that you can post on a consistent basis. The key thing is just to do it. To do it and to do it well. And by doing it well doesn't mean it has to be a lot of time. You're already doing it. You're already creating the content every week as a church. You already have your sermon outlines and your sermon things your preacher's doing. Post those. There's so many things that can be done on a consistent basis that we have bought into this idea. I don't have time for that. That's the thing that we say. And I always go, you don't have time for your visitors? You don't have time for the visitors? Like, because that's who they are. It's your future visitors is who you don't have time for. Now, to be fair, there are some churches where I know there are preachers out there who are just working just night and day, doing everything they can. Always prioritize people over just processes. Always.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
social media works for me. I don't work for it. And
Right.
there's a huge difference between those two. But don't forget that the future of your church often is based off of who you are talking to, who you are evangelizing to, because there's a lot of churches out there who meant well, who turned around and their youngest member is in their 60s.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
missed all the visitors through the years.
Yes, totally agree with all of that. And one of the things that we've seen in real life is how smaller churches who may not have the resources were able to cope during COVID and realize,
Yes.
wow, there's a whole platform here that we can get the message out through live streaming and
Yes.
things of that nature. And it was a great thing. It was a great thing to see, and it still continues. There are many churches that are small as far as number, but they're reaching hundreds, maybe thousands on a
Yes.
weekly basis because of just simply putting their phone up on an extension and recording their sermon while they're standing up there. It's a beautiful thing. So it can be done. I agree with you. As we kind of wrap things up, Brandon, talk about some of the do's and don'ts, just some toxic things to stay away from and some really good things to do if you're a church wanting to reach people through website, through social media, those kind of things.
Yeah. So the starting point always for me is remember your audience. Remember who it is that you're speaking to when it comes to social media. It's not the saved. And so it's so easy for us just to post the things that sound good to the saved. But it's also not to be controversial. I always tell people, Jesus is controversial enough in and of itself. What Jesus teaches and preaches is going to be countercultural no matter what. It doesn't need you to add a little bit more of a hot sauce to it. So always think through, can I get people to think? I also tell people all the time, post consistently. Consistency is key. I reference, especially when it comes to social media, it needs to feel like your website and your social media are breathing. There's a consistency to it. Like when I come back to it, in fact, I think the rule is if you come back to a website 4 times and nothing has changed, people will not come back a 5th time.
Oh, wow.
And so on a consistent basis, so now they may come back once every week or so forth. Changing something on a website once a week is not rocket science. In fact, it takes me about usually 5 minutes to update, whether it's a sermon on there, a little blog post, whatever it is. Those things already happen. Those are a key component. The other side is constantly keep your thumb on what social medias are actively reaching people. I'll give you a living example that's just happened to me recently. Back in, I guess it was October, I went, all right, I'm starting to see massive trends back on Twitter, X, where I'd abandoned it a while back because I was like, it was a kind of a cesspool of crazy back then. And I went, I don't know what value there might be, but it does seem since a new owner and the rest has come through that something has shifted. And so I went back onto X and I was like, I just wonder what the metrics would be. So I, as just myself, just started posting and creating and content and the rest and engaging with different people. The metrics are astoundingly different than what they were before. As of right now, I think I had 4 weeks where I was out for jury duty. So I had to stop being on social media for 4 weeks because it was a federal jury. So I wasn't allowed on social media. So besides those 4 weeks, I had, it was basically about a month total. So 28 days total. And just as a person with less than 1,000 followers on Twitter, there was almost 5 million impressions and interactions. Wow. Just astounding numbers. People sending me messages about Bible classes and where do we meet and how often. Now, a lot of the conversations are soccer and there are other things too, but they're seeing somebody who's real and alive, who's a minister and so forth. I've been shocked by that. It would take me 2 years to get that on Facebook and other places right now. And so even like, where are people at? And by the way, Twitter's new XX, I guess I should call it, is new thing. 48% Republican, 48% Republican, 47% Democrat is the current metrics on it, with 1 billion active users from around the world.
Interesting.
It's where people have migrated over the last year. It's astounding. And so from a church perspective, I'm teaching at Freed-Hardeman's lectureships this year on church and media. So I've been doing this as a test to say, like, what would happen if a church got on here? What are the type of metrics? What could you use and so forth? It's mind-blowing. And I had written it off about a year ago. I mean, completely written it off because I was like, I don't like it at all. Major differences. So you have to constantly stay on your toes for the trends of where people are. And as a church, social media people are moving constantly. TikTok was a massive trend. We'll see whether or not it's still not banned next year. So that could change and alter things. Twitter's another. Facebook still has its consistency, but Facebook has a lot more AI ads than it ever did before. So keep on track with trends, not to be trendy, but to remember your audience. Where are the people? I want to go where the people are. Like, I want to be where they are so I can share the good news of Jesus on a consistent basis. And that's got to be a church's mentality. A church's mentality is, where are the people and how can we reach them? Because I want them to know that there is a minister in Columbus, Ohio that loves them, that would love to have a debate with them, would love to have a discussion with them. And if they don't know I exist, they will not find me. And so how can I encourage them in those ways? So be trendy, but it's not about trends. It's keeping your pulse it can be your thumb on the pulse of culture and where we are. And don't forget, the future of your congregations doesn't know what it's like to not have an iPad. They don't right now. So if you're not on social media, if you're not engaged in these things, you're missing out on the whole next generation. If you wonder why your church is not growing in those areas, it's because there's been no desire to really get engaged with them and say, well, it'll be fine and so forth. We'll get our people in the future. That is not how it works anymore. They're online. And I know it's overwhelming. I know it's a lot. And so I do offer this all the time to people. Reach out to me on social media. Call me up. I've probably done about 300 different little interviews with preachers and elders and the rest, just walking them through what they can do, evaluating their social media to help them out, and just say, here's what I would do. Here's a little plan of what that would do. Here's the free version, and here's what it would cost for you to do something different. But just get in the game. The church, like the world, needs the church. It needs the church to be what Jesus has always called the church to be, a light in a dark world. It needs us to step forth and not be afraid anymore. I'm not afraid of failure. I'm afraid of not being faithful. And that's what we're called to be. And so it's the old Shakespeare line, once more into the breach, dear friends. Like, we have to dive into this because we're called to something more in this life. We have the good news. And if these places are dark and terrible, take the light in there. That's where we're called to go.
Absolutely. That's a great point to end on. Thank you, Brandon, so much for being with me today. And I want to let our viewers and listeners know that if you have a question about today's episode, you can email me at chris.mccurley@rippleoflight.com. And if you have a specific question for Brandon, be happy to send it on to him. And I'm sure he'd be glad to answer your question or to give counsel if you're looking to upgrade a website or kick off a website or get on social media. I'm sure he's willing to do all that. Brandon, thank you so much for being on today, and good luck and blessings to you going forward.
My pleasure. Thank y'all so much. It really is wonderful to be with you.
Absolutely. And thank everyone for tuning in. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Sincerely, Chris.